It was all these headlines about how men are losing their masculinity, and how the young men are so much weaker than the future men, and like all these things that sound like everything you've been reading the last year, and they were all written in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And it's kind of one of those things where the older generation, with their acquired wisdom, automatically assumes that the younger generation isn't as tough as us, isn't as cool as us, is missing something. Something's being drastically changed. And of course, change is real and change does happen. But I sometimes think that we get ourselves into moral panics, unnecessary moral panics. But what we had was language, cooperation, and the ability to tell narratives and stories, and the ability to believe in magic. And it's precisely the magical thinking that also makes our stories wonderful. It makes us get addicted to Star Wars and the Game of Thrones, because we are genetically predisposed for fear and magical thinking. But at the same time, we are community animals. We're tribal. We need each other. We need a collective as much as we need an independent thing. And that's what I see as the yin and yang of our existence. I always ask myself, I mean, clearly because I have kids, I would not want any of my children to be going through such anguish, whether I'm for trans or against, because obviously that's a hard thing to have in a culture. But I think the same people that 30 years ago were taking baseball bats to the gay men coming out of the gay bars are the same people attacking the trans thing. It's the same thing. It's coming from a place of personal fear, personal threat towards your masculinity, or personal fear that these people are going to convince your kids to transition. And I don't know if it's that abundant to a point where we need to be in a moral panic. And we project onto the past, and I do it too, a very romantic view of the past. Like all our movies about the Elizabethan era or the olden times, they don't show the ignorance, the diseases that we had no idea, that we assumed if you had an infection, it was evil spirits or demons were infecting. Like all that stuff, that liberal thinking leading us to the age of enlightenment has over 200 years gotten us away from, cannot be neglected. That a nostalgia for the past is not always this romanticized, glorified past that our brains want it to be. But I also think that message, the message that somehow back then the Black family structure and Black culture was better than it is now, is a message aimed at the white person. It's aimed at helping the white person somehow rationalize that it wasn't that bad. I don't think that that's very, yeah, I hear that always from white people. I don't hear that often from Black. It's not necessarily the tech. It's the programming. It's social media. It's the monopolization of a few companies that own fucking everything. It's the fact that the wealthiest among us, individual or a corporation, pay an effective tax rate of less than 8%. And that the working people, whether you're working as a lawyer making $300K a year or a fry cook making $30K a year at best. Why are those the people who are being taxed the most? And that's because those who have the power, I'm going to call them the oligarch class, now have more power than our own government.
So, Sifu Slim here, folks, and this is conversation number 4. The previous conversation where we talked about the history of parts of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, relationships, Chris's beginning, going for different aspects of Jiu-Jitsu and different pieces of your life. That's online, and it's gotten a good response. So thank you to all the viewers who've made that happen, because we want to get these messages out, because we are two Sifus who care, and that's really the bottom line in anything we do. I think when Sifu Chris and I were young people, we wanted to have achievements. We wanted to notch things off of our list. We wanted to impress people, including our fathers, perhaps. And we wanted to learn from these great mentors. We mentioned Hickson Gracie in the last episode. And now, as elder statesmen who have 1/3 of our lives left, we really want to take an assessment of what we've learned. And we want to listen, yes, to the different generations, people older than us, younger than us, and very much younger than us, like Chris's children. But we want to listen to that with an open heart and an open mind and share wisdom. And so that's what I wanted to open with, and see, first of all, if Sifu Chris, if you had anything to mention about what I opened with.
Yeah, I think, the one thing that I believe is there are certain patterns that we do culturally over time. And, I was reading this really interesting article about a month ago. I wish I could find it so we could add a link. It was all these headlines about how men are losing their masculinity, and how the young men are so much weaker than the future men, and like all these things that sound like everything you've been reading the last year. And they were all written in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And it's kind of one of those things where the older generation, with their acquired wisdom, automatically assumes that the younger generation isn't as tough as us, isn't as cool as us, is missing something. Something's being drastically changed. And of course, change is real and change does happen. But I sometimes think that we get ourselves into moral panics, unnecessary moral panics over things that, and that almost makes it worse. It's like, you could say that, like, I remember being young, and in the 1980s, the fear over heavy metal music, the game Dungeons and Dragons, and it's going to corrupt and destroy a generation. Now, if you believe that that generation, Gen Xers, are destroyed, you could cite that as your evidence. But I think it was all moral panic. And the same thing in the 90s, that somehow if men were allowed to marry each other, it was going to destroy the institution of marriage and the family will fall apart. And so I just kind of think that, yeah, there's a lot of moral panicking pressed out there these days. And what is that? There's 3 kinds of lies: a lie, a damned lie, and statistics. And, people use statistics, are very easy to manipulate and create to back up your argument wherever it comes from. So
So
There's my opening rant.
so Sifu, Chris, you're keeping a little bit of an open mind about the current things we see in the media, the woke, the transgender, the polar opposites, the polarization of politics, the good versus bad, these types of things. Is what you're saying is that you're taking a little bit more of a Buddhist distant look at this and saying, hey, it's no different from different aspects of our great grandfathers' lives and grandfathers' lives.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's no different. We're clearly in an age of accelerated change. It's like that thing where if if you went from the year 1550 to 1650, were there changes? Yeah, but not a lot. The average person lived the same general life that their grandparents lived, and their kids would also live that same general life. And that was fairly true until the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution, which was a first acceleration that changed culture rapidly. And you could say the first real phase of globalization where ships are doing intercontinental travel and cultures are clashing and meshing and mashing and knowledge is being rapidly spread, and that created all kinds of fears, and a lot of authors wrote about all that change that was happening and how we were going from an age of religion basically being the state and the top of the hierarchy to suddenly entrepreneurs, machining, the age of enlightenment. This was and there were moral panics of the day, witch burnings, all these. And I don't know, I kind of see in this internet age that maybe in 100 years, if humans are still on the earth and resemble basically what we are, maybe we'll be sort of transhuman because we'll have chips in our brain or enhanced learning or whatever it is. But I think if we survive, we will see much of what is making headline news as moral panics, like the Algerian woman, a boxer, and instantly the other side assuming she's trans, assuming she was born male. And then you have on the other side, called in the woke trans rights activists, who refuse to even look at of rare small instances where somebody born male transitioned and is now playing female sports. They refuse to even look at it. So we do have polarized extremes. And in an age where you want clicks, that's what you use. So if you wanted clicks on this YouTube show, you would come up with new information on trans athletes, and that's going to get a lot more clicks than what I would rather we talked about, which is the nuances of this and how it's not black and white and things change. And so, yeah, in terms of all the current woke stuff, God, my brain generally says, and I recognize my arrogance when I say this, when we're inching towards potential nuclear war, climate change is real, and AI is going to drastically change the world. Something like 0.0000014% of people, trans, is suddenly some huge issue. I think it's absurd. I find it completely absurd.
Yeah, the priorities and the info blast that we see as part
it's
of
so unimportant.
Yeah, it's important to a segment of the population, so the press, of course, can grab that and sensationalize it. It's not that we don't feel
Yep.
for those people who have gender dysphoria and other issues.
Sure.
They're new. It's new information to us. I'm sure Sigmund Freud had to deal with some of this stuff in the late 1800s, early 1900s, but it's very
Oh yeah.
new to the mass populations who grew up when we did. As far as imparting wisdom to people in a crisis, we all get into crises from time to time. I had the very welcome opportunity to interview as one of my early interviews in my Aging Athlete project, Billy Mills, who's the only person from the Americas to ever win, at least as last time I looked. I don't know if anybody won the 10,000 meters in the recent Olympics, but he's the only person from the Americas to win the 10,000 meters. And he did that at a time where he had racism against him. He had hypoglycemia, borderline sugar disorder,
Wow.
diabetes disorder. And he was a young man without a path. He lost both of his parents at a very young age, one at age 8, one at age 14, grew up poor in a shack on a reservation as a Lakota Sioux at a time of non-plenty, of minimal things. And so here's a quote from Billy Mills. He says, "You have to look deeper, way below the anger, the hurt, the hate, the jealousy, the self-pity. Way down deeper where the dreams lie, son. Find your dream. It's the pursuit of the dream that heals you." So that's a quote from his father, who passed that wisdom on to Billy when Billy was having trouble, and he had trouble frequently. And what he did to overcome that, after winning the 10,000 meter race in the 1964 Olympics, he started going on speaking tours. And he became more and more involved in that. And so when I met him in 2013, right when I had said goodbye to my mother, I knew she didn't have long to live. She had cancer in 3 different places. So I said goodbye to her, and then I fly to Sacramento, and I got to spend 3 hours with Billy Mills outside of Sacramento. And he told me that he traveled about 300 days per year to share his message and to help benevolent causes. So mostly donating his time, living in hotels with his wife to go pick people up, to uplift people. And so talk about a journey to overcome the obstacles that he had. I can't think of a better way to save yourself, heal yourself, and to impart the good wishes onto others in need. Over to Chris for his thoughts.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I really like about that quote is he doesn't say that you have to accomplish the goal. He just says the magic happens from trying. It's trying to fulfill your dream. It's not fulfillment and then you get the happiness. It's the journey of going after your dream. And quite often you don't ever reach that goal, that youthful goal, that high aspiration. And sometimes even not reaching that goal is a bigger reward than achieving it. And that because different things happen on the way and our path changes, and we're self-seeking, and then we begrudgingly go help someone, which gets in the way of our goal, and we realize that, wow, it was better to help the person and not get my goal than to actually achieve my goal. And it's I think there's so much emphasis these days on, let's call it self-help, and everybody trying to become self-actualized. And then there's another segment of the population that says anytime you're thinking about yourself or working on yourself while the planet's on fire, you're like, when Rome is burning, you're off playing the fiddle and partying and or working on yourself. What are you doing? And then there's a whole guilt implication behind that. So, God, what is my point? Self-help is a wonderful thing, especially when it humbles you and leads you to a place where you realize that helping others is equally as important and equally as enlightening.
Wonderful, Sifu Chris. What I wrote down as a title, possible title, point of focus for our conversation is a modern conversation about identity and loss of conserving things that worked for our parents and grandparents. So there's a loss of identity in some respects to our former generations, which I think is a new thing. I think if you go back to the pre-TV era, we had so many people at the turn of the 20th century that were working in agriculture, working with animals, that they learned things from their father, their uncle, and their mother. And this was something that had happened for since the dawn of agriculture. And the same thing happened with the hunting and gathering people beforehand. Not a lot of big changes. You know, you're looking down the road at your life and you're saying, I've got to learn these skills to raise my family. So this idea of TMI in the modern internet era, where we have, on one hand, too much information, and then we also have too much imagery. So instead of, like, I was a teacher in the 1990s, and I was a break dancer, former professional mascot, and so I'm dancing with these kids. And then I saw a change when YouTube came about, and I saw kids gravitate to looking at other people across the globe who were the elite break dancers who they could not very easily reach and didn't want to reach. They wanted to watch and say, hey, did you see this video? Did you see that video? So very quickly, YouTube changed the culture of doing to watching. And it didn't do that for everyone, but it did it with a huge segment of the population. So over to Chris for his thoughts about identity and too much information and loss of identity.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com. And when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
Yeah, that is, you know, the internet, again, like as a whole, the internet has connected the world. So anybody, that's going to cause so much disruption, and definitely the individual isolated tribe with its main mentor is now competing with mentors online, and that is clearly both a good and a bad thing, because if you're in a cultish tribe, maybe because you scrolled around on YouTube, you found out you were kind of in a cultish tribe. Or that YouTube algorithm will put you further down the rabbit hole of whatever tribal identity things you're after. And I think it's all, I don't think our human nature has necessarily, how do I put this in a way that doesn't sound ignorant? It's not like our human nature has changed that much, but our tools and it's accelerated, and acceleration and change bring fear. whether you're on the right or the left, or you identify with the right or the left, there's a lot of fear out there. And because what's, the old line, if it's 100,000 years ago, you're in a small band of humans, you're following the leader who happens to be the fastest runner and can throw a spear really good, and there's a rustle in the bushes, you run, because even if you think it might be the wind, you run. Because if you don't run and it's a tiger or another tribe preparing an ambush, you're going to get killed. And then you don't pass on your genetics. So as children, the children that are alert to the rustling in the trees, which is why as kids we're often more disposed to fear and magical thinking, why when you turn out the lights, that's when it gets scary. I mean, think about how recent electric lighting was. And then even think about how recent having a candle was. The night was a time of fear for all humans. It was a very scary time. We don't have that grade of night eyes. There's wolves, tigers, eagles, other things that can see way better at night than we can. But what we had was language, cooperation, and the ability to tell narratives and stories, and the ability to believe in magic. And it's precisely the magical thinking that also makes our stories wonderful. It makes us get addicted to Star Wars and the Game of Thrones, because we are genetically predisposed for fear and magical thinking. But at the same time, we are community animals. We're tribal. We need each other. We need a collective as much as we need an independent thing. And that's what I see as the yin and yang of our existence.
So, Sifu, Chris, looking into the tribal thing, there are people, as you know, that are doing their gathering online. So here's an example. There's a preteen girl in Seattle, and she's gaming with a girl in Italy. And they develop a relationship over the course of a year. And the girl in Italy is now turning 12. And the girl in Seattle says, oh, now is the time you have to choose your gender. Now is the time you have to decide if you want to be a boy or a girl or non-binary or whatever you want to do. And you may have to get a surgery this year if that's what you want to do, is transition. So this to me is a drastic response, and it's not something to play around with, because young people are impressionable, they are impulsive, and it's a drastic response. I think that give things some time, let things develop. Identities for some people takes longer to develop. You know, the idea of human development doesn't happen for everyone at the same pace. So I think those are things that have drastically changed in the last 50 years. Whereas if we had a family around us with elders, with cousins, we would see who our family was. You know, our great grandfather from this country married somebody from this country, and they developed these things. They went to this church. They did their food this way. They were farmers, or they were industrialists. They were woodworkers, whatever they were. And you had this identity that you could see being passed down through the generations. And in the modern era, a lot of people don't know what country their grandparents or great-grandparents came from, and they're doing these
especially
things,
Americans,
they're doing a lot of impulsive and drastic responses that I think are concerning. Over to Chris to see what he thinks.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, I genuinely believe that the vast majority of people, including people who vote leaning left, think that a 12-year-old deciding to transition is not only wrong, but absurd. But I really hesitate. And I was having this debate with one of my friends just the other week who is into what I'm going to call a moral panic over this. I don't think it's this thing that's happening very much. I think there are instances of it, and I'm sure the amount of it has doubled, even quadrupled. So instead of 2 out of 100,000, we now have 4 out of 100,000. Probably 4 out of a million. I mean, we could look up and see what the statistics are. And when I was in this argument, we did. And so when 1 out of a million, when that triples and it's 3 out of a million, suddenly we have a moral panic. Just like when people talk about the homicide rates in Chicago, one gang killing suddenly quadruples the homicide rate of it, even though it was gangster on the gangster crime. And then when somebody points that out, we go down a rabbit hole on the problem of single parent households and what happened. And one side is going to blame it on mass incarceration and emasculation and the structure, and the other side will blame it on the culture and even go as far as to say the genetic predispositions of their race. And these are, like, I'm one of those people that truly believes that the more scientifically literate you are, with a constant check of not only open-mindedness, but critical thinking, that balance, because you can be so open-minded, you're gullible, and you can obviously be so closed-minded, you're ignorant. You can be a great critical thinker, but then get caught up in the hubris of thinking that your facts are so solid that you're impervious to knowledge. Like, all right, I would venture to say, and this might piss off somebody on the woke left here, but I would venture to say that 40 years ago, a lot of gay feminine men who were genetically just feminine or whatever it was, did not have a medical opportunity to a transition, and some of them would have. So I think that to me, that seems fairly obvious. As a result of our medical technology, now these people can transition. Now, my gut feeling says, don't transition, accept who you are, and go through life exactly who you are. Somebody who has genetic traits closer to the, like, if we have the extreme, like, let's just call the extreme side of this black is male, the extreme side of this white. I think very few people are pure black or pure white, but that's the ideal that culture chases, to be fully the man or be fully the woman. Whereas I think most people fall a little bit, most men are pretty dark gray, and most women are pretty light gray, but they're still fucking gray. And then somewhere we have in the middle there, and those middle people used to just live out life as being gay. Now some of them want to transition. And then I always ask myself, I mean, clearly because I have kids, I would not want any of my children to be going through such anguish, whether I'm for trans or against, because obviously that's a hard thing to have in a culture. But I think the same people that 30 years ago were taking baseball bats to the gay men coming out of the gay bars are the same people attacking the trans thing. It's the same thing. It's coming from a place of personal fear, personal threat towards your masculinity, or personal fear that these people are going to convince your kids to transition. And I don't know if it's that abundant to a point where we need to be in a moral panic. Now, we might need but to be. And of course, if it was happening to my kid, even though I'm pretty open-minded, I would definitely not want a 12-year-old but to transition. But I would have to look at each individual case.
So
I couldn't put a blanket.
Yeah. So Sifu, Chris, I
Yeah.
happened to be at this church castle in the Austrian Alps yesterday, and I was amazed at the wisdom of the
Wow.
architects in the post-Renaissance in the 1800s, where they took the rocks of the foundation and they built the structure of this 5-story castle over that. And I said, boy, look at the foundation.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
foundation is a really important thing. So that's what I was trying to get at when I mentioned the parents and the ancestors and the lack of change, and our ability to be with our cousins and our uncles on so regular a basis that we couldn't help but know everything about them, just like a tribal group of people. You eat dinner every night, you work in the fields with them, you roll the hay up in the bales. You really get to know somebody out and about, and you learn about females and being on their cycle, which I think is a really important thing for all parts of society, especially men, to understand, because it's a definite different part of the month than the other 3/4 of the month. And so we men don't have that, but we have our other challenges. But it's good for these, people in societies to know how the other sex operates. And so that's one thing I wanted to share. And then the second thing is the idea of a surgery or a dramatic change solving a problem and then everything's going to be okay afterwards is just as silly as somebody who's got a disorder of some kind or a challenge of some kind, and they say, well, once I get my blue belt or purple, brown, or black belt in jiu-jitsu, everything's going to be fine. No, that's not the case at all. The case is that you can achieve goals, but reaching some new thing or getting some new surgery isn't the problem solver in and of itself. Do you agree with that, Sifu, Chris?
I mean, I do. I both. I mean, I definitely agree with. Okay, so let's go back 100 years and say, let's go back 200 years and say it's the year 1824, and the best medical knowledge at that time is still cleaning wounds with a mercury-based disinfectant, which now we know is a poison.
Mercurochrome.
They're still leaching mercurochrome. I mean, if you think about all of the stupid things we used to do, I would say it is good that we no longer do those stupid things. Mm-hmm. I would say that imagine being a gay black 14-year-old boy, knowing that not only could you be attacked over race, but you could be attacked over, I'll just use the current terminology, your gender identity or your sexual orientation, these things. So you would have to spend the rest of your life absolutely repressed because of this foundational, let's call it good culture, this good Christian upbringing. So I think with everything that we want to call good, there's a dark side too. And the more we repress things and deny it and fight change, we can do that so much till we get a point where we regress. It's like the common joke that most people now believe is every time you find an anti-gay activist, they're almost always religious and they get caught sucking a dick because they're repressing their own homosexual, they're repressing self-hate because they came up in a culture that says if you're gay, you're bad. And so, yes, I think culture and institution and the natural hierarchy and your family elders and all this stuff, I think is really important. But I think we lose sight of it and we glorify it and make it something that it's also very repressive. And I'm not saying we should rapidly change and switch society and all that. That's not, life works. I'm basically a Hegelian Taoist, where these things work yin and yang in a balance and they go through. And literally choosing a side is what creates imbalance. And right in the middle seems to be naturally, there are things where you will choose a side and say, yes, that 11-year-old, it's dumb for them to transition. And at the same time, you'll find out that the 14-year-old who has felt that their whole life, let them transition. How is it going to harm me or my family if I'm allowing some 14-year-old another country away to transition? And then I have to ask myself, why am I afraid of that? What do I feel like? What security? What on Maslow's hierarchy of needs is it threatening? What do I feel threatened by? And is it I am threatened as a father, and that's going to happen to my kids? Because that's my gut reaction is instantly like, oh my God, what if one of my kids is online and someone convinces them that they're trans, and then they secretly start going trans. They identify with this, and then they, in essence, become trans because they have adopted an identity. And so, like, believe me, I've thought a lot about this. I've been thinking about this since I was a teenager, and I grew up in the era of the 80s, which was that weird era where gay was coming out, but you never talked about it. The heavy metal bands with their tight jeans and long hairs and makeup on stage, like, it was a very androgynous era. Men and women were having the same haircuts in the 80s. They opened up Supercuts barbershop that was unisex. And we had that same moral panic. The same thing we're experiencing right now was happening in the 80s. And oddly enough, some of those same people project and look back on the 80s as this wonderful time, this wonderful period where everybody was happy and the family was right and all that. And we think of our sitcoms and all that. So just like we opened up with, I think nostalgia is both good and bad. And there's also fear of change. I think fear of change is so powerful for all of us.
I've heard, Sifu Chris, some of the commentators online talk about the issues of people in the dating world these days, and we could have 80-year-old people dating. It's not just teenagers and 20 and 30-year-olds who are dating. Everybody's dating these days. Yeah. And historically, that wasn't the case. Post World War II, there wasn't a lot of dating. You were in an agricultural industrial world. You went right from your family's house to your man's family's house, or he moved in with your family. There was no dating for a year and a half. There was no 4 years of college and testing the waters. It was, at age 14 or 20, you got married, and there you were for the rest of your life. So that's a historic way, and the third world still operates like that in many cases. But what I wanted to share what I wanted to share about the third world versus the first world, you have this relationship to survival, which is what the people in the Great Depression, like my grandparents' era, had to face. And then prior to them, same type of thing. And then the hunting and gathering people, this move to survive. And then there were times of thriving, which is that an enhanced state where you do have food, you do have water, you're not being invaded, And so like the Hawaiian Islands had that for a time, and they had enough food for everyone, and they could work on different things, but they, you know, that might have lasted 15 years, 25 years. Then they had an invasion or some, or a disease or something like this. So it wasn't vast swaths of Homo sapiens history where you had long periods of this thriving. But in the modern era, we have people living inside of drywall. They have all the information they want. They have all the calories they want. They're not all the minerals and vitamins that they want naturally, but they're not having these survival issues from outside invasion in the West for the most part, unless you're in the Ukraine or something like this at the present time.
Yeah, I'm going to say yes and no. I mean, don't you kind of think that I mean, we certainly are in an age of abundance where if you're in the West, especially America, you can be pretty poor and still be overweight because we have fast food on every corner and a bag of chips that has enough preservatives where it's going to last 20 years. Like, yes, there's, and again, I think it's very difficult for us to put ourselves in, and our imaginations to put ourselves in a different environment and not think that we know what we would be doing. And we project onto the past, and I do it too, a very romantic view of the past. Like all our movies about the Elizabethan era or the olden times, they don't show the ignorance, the diseases that we had no idea, that we assumed if you had an infection, it was evil spirits or demons were infecting. Like all that stuff that liberal thinking leading us to the age of enlightenment has over 200 years gotten us away from cannot be neglected. That a nostalgia for the past is not always this romanticized, glorified past that our brains want it to be. Like I romance all the time for that period of, call it 1975 through 1995, where I'm a kid that transitions to a teenager, into a young adult, and I come of age. To me, when I look back at that period, the music, the culture, the changings, the end of communism, the wall coming down, this all seems like what a glory, what a wonderful time that was. How much better it is than now. America needs to go back to that. Like, I get it. I'm not saying that, and I'm not even saying I'm against nostalgia. It's what we do. And I always ask people whether I think they're leaning right or left or even no. If you had to go back, what time do you think, say, America was great? For you, when was America great?
You want me to answer
What
that?
would be your, yeah.
So I would say 1968. I'm a 6-year-old kid. I'm playing ice hockey. The entire season of ice hockey cost my dad $12, and I had 3 coaches in New Jersey. And it was great competition. I was following the NHL players. I got to meet some of them. I was on a high as a young kid looking for identity. I had my father, I had my uncles. I was about 2 years away from moving to a farm. Everything was clicking, and I thought that was wonderful. And meanwhile, the Cold War was raging, and you know, there were just about to get into hijacking of airplanes time, Middle East crisis, soon to get into the Jimmy Carter 10 years later era with the high inflation, high debt, and all these types of things. But the 1968, to me, age of innocence, age of every day was exciting. I had a driving force to improve and to be part of this palette that I thought was really a cool time in American history and in my development.
Okay, now let's just hypothesize if we're going to ask somebody your same age, somebody who right now is a, let's just get extreme and people will say I'm stereotyping here, but let's say if we asked a male gay black intellectual of your same age, if he thought his life in rural Alabama in 1968 was a better time than it is now. And I'll bet you it's going to be the exact opposite of what you think. Obviously, he could not come out as gay. He was from a place in the middle of Jim Crow South where if you voiced an opinion, you could be hanging off of a tree that night. You know somebody, you've watched your dad be called the N-word and not be able to respond because if he did, the Klan would raid your home that night. So it's so individual in a perspective. And there's a crisis right now of young, especially white men, trying to find identity. And with the feeling that the woke left is trying to make them feel bad and guilty. And there's instances of all of these that will justify their opinions. The rise of Andrew Tate, all of these things are unlike the left, which might just morally judge it, or the religious right, which morally judges the left. Like, as an amateur anthropologist who loves cultural anthropology, I think that gives us the best course to navigating these rapidly changing times. And it's also another one of the things I always ask, like, there's a certain type of person who envisions the future utopia as this thing where we cherry pick things out of the past that we like, we keep the things that we've changed, and we go into this utopic future. There's a dystopic view where we think of all the things in that 1968 era that seemed great, and we say they're all gone now. And they've been replaced with this, whether you're on there's a right-wing dystopic version and a left-wing. And I even hate using those terms because I'm already creating a black and white a binary, when again, I think it's shades of gray in here. And, you know, the 1980s was really when we started as in the West culturally gravitating towards the dystopic fantasy movies and novels, Blade Runner, the essence of that fear of what kind of a future are we going into. And the great writers would do that. Add elements of coolness were going in there and elements of the darkness, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I think it all depends on who you ask and who you are and what period people find is great. And I'm sure the current 10-year-old is going to, if humans last in 50 years, is going to look back on theirs like, oh, the 2020s were such a great period. We had this, and this. We had iPads, but they weren't connected to our head yet. And there will be romanticizing a different past. Unless you had a horrific experience in the past, then you tend to look more towards an idealistic future and want to change it to make it different than your horrific past.
If family and community is as important as anything else out there, not just your own personal identity and your own personal fitting in, but the community and the family. And I think those are two things I would lead with to talk about generations and analyze decades of history. I would talk about how the family was able to do economically, to provide for themselves, to spend time together, to work in the community, to volunteer, to assist each other, all these types of things. And so I'm going to ask my idea of what James Baldwin, 1924.
I love James Baldwin.
Yeah, I love
I
James
love
Baldwin.
James Baldwin.
To 1987. He died in France in 87, and I had just left France
Yeah.
by the time he passed away. And I'm not sure if he had to go there for more freedom of writing and socializing without being hammered for being gay and bisexual. But if I had to ask him about what I said previously about the generations being disconnected now as opposed to the previous generations, like I worked in the inner city in Sacramento, and there's a place called Oak Park. And I was going to an all-black church, or mostly black church there in the late 90s. And the neighborhood, you see a lot of people that are not going to church and that are living what I would call more disconnected, because I got to know these families. I got to know the high school and the junior high kids and their parents. And I would ask them about, these types of questions, as opposed, compared to the time of the KKK and Jim Crow and segregation and busing and racism in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Compare what we have in the late 90s to then. Where do you think the black family and the black community was better off? And I think James Baldwin would say what these people in this neighborhood told me, that it was better with all the horrific things that happened to them in prior generations because of the sense of community and the family structure.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, I think, is true. But I also think that message, the message that somehow back then the black family structure and black culture was better than it is now, is the message aimed at the white person. It's aimed at helping the white person somehow rationalize that it wasn't that bad. I don't think that that's very, yeah, I know I hear that always from white people. I don't hear that often from black people. Now there are some black conservatives out there. There are some leading things, and yes, I know that 80% of black people vote blue, just like 76% of white Gen Xers vote red. And I think it's more interesting asking ourselves why that is true. And there's a lot of history revision that we do where like one of the common lines that you always hear is, oh, it was the Democrats that were the racists, and they were. It was conservative Democrats, chiefly of the South, that were the worst racists. Then from 1965 to 1985, there was a period which is called the party shift. And yes, it's real. And it was a period of time where civil rights was passed by non-racist Democrats and non-racist Republicans and opposed by racist conservative Democrats. And when that passed, those people felt like they were without a party. Just like if you go to a Democratic National Convention in 2004, you're going to see a rainbow coalition of races and gender and all that. The Republicans, if you look at the big audience, it's going to be mostly white people. They'll grab the 8 black people and put them in front so the camera makes it look diverse.
Yeah.
And that's just a thing that And I love conservatism, and half of my friends and family are Republicans, but they don't want to look at that. That is something that they don't want to look at. And yes, the Democrats often, there's certain economic issues they don't want to look at, and certain woke issues that they try to avoid. And I don't know. I think people need to study history. The problem is when you say that, are you going to go jump on a PragerU and get, Fox News version of history? And there's a left version of that. Are you going to jump on a Pacifica Radio, KPFK, and get white men have always been bad message? It's all white men's problem. The message. It's all colonialization message. So like there is these extremes out there that don't get the nuances of history. And I encourage you, anyone out there who heard this, if you are on the far left or right, even if you might not think you are, I'm sure I do, I hold opinions that cannot be backed up with a fact. And the curious mind, if I'm going to watch a PragerU history video, I want to also watch a PragerU debunked by a PhD historian, who says, here's where they were right, here's where they totally ignored this entire area, and here's why the current Democratic Party is way more multiracial, way more multigendered, way less misogynistic than the current iteration of the Republican Party. I think that's the question. And if you ask a brainwashed white guy, they'll say, oh, because the Democrats tricked all those dumb black people into voting for them for free shit. Like, that's one of the biggest lines of bullshit out there, is that somehow the Democrats promise you free things, and that's why people vote them. I don't buy that line.
No.
I don't think that Democratic voters, rule of thirds. Like 1/3 of America leans right, 1/3 leans left, 1/3 goes whichever candidate seems cooler. And like, I isn't even thinking of ideology and issues. And I think within each party, there's those who follow the news and pay attention. There's those that only hear it secondhand. And there's those that just vote the same way their parents did, right? It's totally nuanced. And I can find you a racist Democrat still, and I can find you an open-minded intellectual Republican. I can always find you an exception. The current black guy running for Republican governor in North Carolina would be a perfect example of a conservative black guy who comes from religious background, who believes that all the problems can be traced to liberalism and progressivism.
I agree with a good portion of all that you said. I will say on the subject of community and family that my race, ethnic European, is suffering the same things that I'm talking about the African Americans in places that I've been and people that I've interviewed. There's a lot of dysfunctional families. There are a lot of single parent homes. There are a lot of kids being raised by television, a lot of family meals that are no longer being eaten together, kids not doing chores. I've seen this as very recently, and very close friends of mine where the kids go home and they get on their iPhone or their computer and they play music, and they talk to people. They've just spent 4 hours with somebody. They go home, now they're back on the phone with that same person they just spent 4 hours with. I never did that when I was a kid. I mean,
as a parent, as a parent, I commiserate with that. Like I find myself often angry. I love Scott Galloway, Jonathan Haidt, who are two intellectual, progressive leaning, but not stupid woke white men who have both done great lectures and written books on about how this fucking phone is not good. And it's not necessarily the tech, it's the programming, it's social media, it's the monopolization of a few companies that own fucking everything. It's the fact that the wealthiest among us, individual or a corporation, pay an effective tax rate of less than 8%. And that the working people, whether you're working as a lawyer making $300K a year or a fry cook making $30K a year at best, why are those the people who are being taxed the most? And that's because those who have the power, I'm going to call them the oligarch class, now have more power than our own government. And I'm a firm believer in democracy, because democracy gives you the ability to course correct when you have fucked up. If you think the election of Obama was the worst thing we ever did, you get to course correct and elect Donald Trump. If you think that was the worst thing we ever did, you get to course correct and elect Biden. When democracy goes, it all goes. And if you are, and also I got to run, but one of the other myths that we all have, in the same way that we are genetically programmed to idealize the great athlete who could run hurdles and throw a spear, because if we hang around in that tribe, we're going to eat. We now do that with our super rich. We somehow assume that they are so smart and bright and also wise. And just because you had a lot of bit of intelligence, a lot of bit of luck, right place, right time, bought the right company, bought the right stocks, suddenly got rich, then you're in a protected bubble that keeps you getting more rich, does not mean you are wise, does not mean you should be controlling the governments. But I can also understand, because I'm a strong opinioned guy, that if suddenly I was worth $100 billion, I would want to put my finger on the scale of politics. And I would want to do it as opaque as I could. I would want to funnel money into the areas that are going to protect my position. And I think that's what we are watching. I might even own the companies that you and I are communicating on. I might even not care that the masses of kids are on these things as long as mine aren't, because mine will inherit $50 billion each.
So last question.
And I think that's the world we're in. Yeah, last one.
Let you run. First of all, I put this background of the Austrian Alps. It's called the Wildkaiser, and it's a strong mountain, and it's got evergreen trees growing along the sides of it. So that's what I wanted to ask you about, is the foundation. So a historical foundation of these mountains and trees, this great relationship that they have together. They're surviving, and there's a structure there. What can young people do, your kids' age, the 15-year-olds, 20-year-olds, these young people, what can they do to help form their identity and to get some stability in their lives so they're not subject to all of these knee-jerk reactions and impulses?
Well, the things I would say, and I think this is more easily said than done, is stay open-minded, be compassionate, and be active. Play sports and try a variety of them. And if somehow you hate sports, play music, do art, do something creative with your body and your mind. And the rules that I've tried to impart to my kids, my 3 simple rules, which then arrives at a 4th a conclusion is listen, don't fuss and pout, and be kind. And if you do those three things, you will naturally be honest as well. When I say listen, that means open your mind and be humble. Even listen, like I force myself to listen to opinions that I don't necessarily, that my knee-jerk reaction is, oh God, that's such bullshit. But I got to hear it because I'm sure in there are grains of truth. I'm sure it's in there. And I don't want to fuss and pout. That's picking up the victim mindset that look what they're doing to me. Look what the conservatives have done to me. Or what is the woke left? I'm a victim of them now. My male identity is being stripped. Or my trans rights are being attacked by those mean conservatives. Like, that's the victim mindset. So you don't fuss and pout. And then you be kind. Manners have prevented more wars, more conflict than anything. Just having good manners, being polite and kind to others. Let's even call them conservative values, if you want, or call them liberal ideals of being kind. However you want to frame it, be kind. And with that, I'll give you my heart out.
All right. Thank you, Sifu Chris. Always a pleasure. And we'll talk to you in the next video. Sir. We'll let you sign off, and then I'll say goodbye to the audience.
Very good. Be cool, Sifu Slim.
All right, brother. Peace out. So there it is, folks. Another wonderful conversation. Blessed that you were able to tune in and hear a little bit about this. And we ask you to like and subscribe. And leave your comments down below, and we'll see if we can get those answered. And any questions you have, any comments you have, leave that below. And until we see each other again, wishing you all the best and your health, happiness, and wellness, and your mind, body, and spirit. Aloha.